I love reminding people that it is. It's not something that we have to go to. It's like a channel we tune to, that we can create the state that allows for us to feel that wholeness of what we are and get ourselves beyond what the mind thinks this is.
When life throws a challenge at you, one thing is certain. To find a resolution for every issue, every problem, for everybody, there's more than one way. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of More Than One Way. Today, Thom and I take a brief detour from the Parable series to share a conversation with a special guest, Dr. Carrie Contey. Kerry has a PhD in clinical psychology with an emphasis on prenatal and perinatal psychology. She describes herself as an insatiably curious explorer and a philosopher at heart. She teaches and coaches in the field of parenting and humanhood. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did. Links will be provided in the episode description to learn more about Kerry and her work. As always, thank you for being with us. Let's jump into the episode. So thanks so much for taking time out to be with us today. We are so excited to talk with you and to learn from you, given your wide variety of expertise. And just thank you so much for being willing to join us.
It's my pleasure. So thank you for having me.
I would love to know, just kind of as we start, what drew you to your field when you talk about perinatal and prenatal psychology. I'll be honest, that's something I was unaware of, that was a field. I would love to hear how you got connected to that and got your start in it.
Oh, I'd love to share. So my story is a little unique, I think, and it's all relevant to what I teach families and humans. As a little tiny child, I was just fascinated with babies and children, which is a funny thing for a child to be fascinated with. But I was like, any baby I could be around, I was like so curious. And some of the moms in my neighborhood growing up had babies, and I was the mother's helper. So I would go and hang out with the moms and chat with them and take care of the little ones. And it was my bliss. Like, it was so clear in me that there was this part of me that knew what I was here for. And so I thought I would be a pediatrician, because the thing I do now didn't exist then, but I moved in that direction and I didn't really love science. So in college, I studied psychology and I still wasn't quite sure. And then in my early 20s, I thought I was going to be a midwife, and I moved in that direction. And that wasn't it either. And then I was living in Austin, Texas, and I found out about this master's program in health promotion. And it was really all about understanding, a more mind-body approach to health. And when I started moving in that direction, my puzzle in my brain that opened up was, why are we having to fix so much in adulthood? I was aware that people were needing help in understanding themselves at that point in their development. And the question that I had was, what happens if we pay attention to what happens to us in early life and there's less to undo, there's less unraveling? And then as I was exploring that in my master's program, I learned about this field of prenatal and perinatal psychology. And all of a sudden, everything opened. And it was like, that's the field that I'm supposed to study. And so as I was learning about it, and all these people who had been pioneering this work, looking at what happens in our earliest phases of life, really has a lifelong influence on who we are and how we operate in the world. This PhD program opened up and I jumped in, and that's kind of how it all began.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, how do you measure in utero? How does that happen? How do you measure what's going on and all that stuff?
It's a lot of Well, so here's a little bit of the history of the field. So back in the 60s and 70s, people were starting to really dive into hypnotherapy and transpersonal psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And these therapists in different places were using hypnosis and telling people, go back to the earliest time when you had this anxiety or this fear or this problem. And all of a sudden, people were giving accounts of their birth and their prenatal experiences. And so people started finding other practitioners who were having similar experiences. There was no known field because we all thought, well, you don't remember. The old paradigm of psychology was that you don't remember those times. They're not, that you don't have memory until you're older, so you don't remember your birth or your prenatal experience. But what we started to understand was, no, if you tap into a different part of the brain, not our thinking memory, not our explicit memory, but our implicit and body memory, it's all in there.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the places that it started to emerge from. And these people all started finding each other and training each other. And then there's anecdotal evidence, really mostly from other cultures, where they believe something different. They think, oh, well, children they are conscious when they arrive. They do remember. And so that's how this body of work really got started and built. So, and now there are studies looking at, if you read books while your baby's in the womb, there's ways that they understand language differently. So it's a fascinating field because it's not something that is common knowledge, even already, 50 to 60 years after it started.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think, one of the things that we try to do on this podcast is go into the spiritual world, that whole realm. And one part of that realm, not only in the Eastern world, but in Western Christianity, is and this is a myth. This is not obviously something that can factually be proven, but is your soul picks your life, as it were. Your soul says, yeah, well, that's one I'll go for, and that picking that somehow or another enables the soul to find the life, in a sense, that is needed in order to grow. And I was at a Episcopal church in Dallas, and where I first heard it publicly, I'd read some stuff about it, but where I first heard somebody actually say it was a guy who was a Roman Catholic priest, of all people. And I was thinking to myself, of all people, you're saying this. And he said it in public, in front of people. And I think on some level, everybody was a bit like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about in terms
of it.
I'm sorry. And what you're talking about in terms of a psychological field has been around for a long time when it comes to trying to look at human beings and what we are.
Yeah. And that's what I teach more than maybe anything. Like the one principle that's foundational to my teaching, the work I do with families, but also this field, is this idea that we're not just this human organism. Yes, this is all here, and we have brains, and we have nervous systems, and we have all our organs and all of our blood and everything, and we are physical matter. But what animates us, what is the essence, the isness, the thing that got turned on when I was a little kid, that has stuck with me since I was a child, that says, go in this direction, learn these things, be of use to people this way. Yeah. That's not a thinking, that's not a human, that's something bigger. And so I tell people, you don't get a baby, you get a big being in a little body. And that body has to grow and develop so it can express itself. But the essence, the consciousness, the isness is always there.
Yeah. That is just so amazing that field is developing. Sometimes it feels like it's just kind of on the periphery of my life anyway, when everything you're saying just kind of connects on an intuitive feeling level. Everything that you're saying to me is just like, that makes perfect sense, because we were kind of talking about this the other day and trying to say, how do you tap into that? Not everybody kind of gets the aha, and it's like,
right.
How do you tap into that? What would you say to people who ask that question?
I would say pay attention to the things that light you up, that give you that sense of like whether it's being in nature, I mean, to me, that's my church, is being outside and being in the air and the seasons and the trees and the flowers. It could be music. It could be church. Like, that's why I think a lot of people want to be in a community, because you're tapping into that collective effervescence, and that effervescence, that feeling of yes that you get after being with humans and in a common, in a communal space, is tapping into that bigger part of ourselves. And to me, it's a game. I tell people it's just a game of warmer, colder. Like, if something pulls you and gives you an open feeling and a warmth inside, go toward it. If it doesn't, let it go, or minimize the amount of time you have to spend doing it. But like, follow the bliss. That is, to me, what gets me into that awareness that there's something this way, not just here.
That makes a lot of sense to me anyway.
Yeah.
Do you find this stuff a bit countercultural in the world that you're a part of, or is it kind of?
A good question. I think when most people hear it, especially if it's said very plainly, it doesn't come with it comes with like, all right, well, there's this body, and there's something that allows us to be the who we are, that isn't there before we're born, and isn't there after we pass on. What is, like, that's what's curious to me, is like, how do we, so as far as, I mean, when I share this stuff with parents, especially during pregnancy or after the baby person has arrived on the outside, they seem to get it. Like, it almost feels like a little bit of a light switch goes on of like, oh yeah, I know that, but I just didn't know it. I didn't have it in my awareness, but now that you're saying it, this is a person. I don't have a baby. There's no such thing as a baby. There's a human that has to be in a physical body and go through a phase of development that we call babyhood, but it's not some other creature that becomes a human later.
Right.
Yeah. So in thinking about that and that kind of becoming process, from your background, is there a time that starts, that becoming process, or that consciousness piece? That may be too big of a question, but.
No, it's a great question. I mean, that's a big question, and that's got a lot of people stirring in all different directions. But in my world, I mean, so I could say I don't know, but what I can imagine, and based on other cultures, like I'll use the Tibetan culture. So there's, like, in the Tibetan culture, they believe that the consciousness is there before even conception, and that through the development in the womb, the consciousness is embodying. And some people say it's 6 weeks, and some people say it's 3 months. I don't know. But the idea is that for this life to emerge as a human, the consciousness is basically focusing. And then, after 9 months in the womb, out comes a person.
Gotcha.
And what I've had experiences of is some people seem very present and very alert and very aware right after birth. And some seem like they're taking a little bit of time before they kind of land. At about 6 weeks, most little tiny babies sort of start smiling and interacting, but those first 6 weeks are like, maybe they're in between worlds. And
Yeah.
having been with my dad as he was passing on, I often wonder, is there a similar sort of outro? Like
Interesting. Yeah.
the being in two worlds, let's say, happens in the beginning and at the end. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think those are in my experience, I think those are big ones, the big extreme.
Yeah.
But the living in between two worlds can happen, in my experience, anytime. And it's a lot of it has to do kind of with temperament, or the particular person, the unique person. I'll just speak to myself. I won't beat around the bush. I'll just talk about me. So my experience oftentimes is that just when I meditate, when I find myself like you said, in a beautiful place in nature, that I find myself in this kind of in-between space oftentimes. And a lot of times I'm kind of like the little baby you're talking about who's not quite sure they want to come back yet, You know what I mean? So that can happen in small and big ways, and that has in my life. And I think, some of it is why what you're saying, for me anyway, is intuitively true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just speaks to my heart and my soul, because on some level I experience that.
Yeah, and I think we all do. And I'm excited for conversations like these, because in my experience, the more people hear these ideas, the more we're open to those experiences, whether it's meditation or swimming in the ocean, or being on the top of a mountain, or just being in an embrace with somebody we love. Like that's like I love reminding people that we can find it's not something that we have to go to. It's like a channel we tune to, that we can create the state that allows for us to feel that wholeness of what we are, and get ourselves beyond what the mind thinks this is.
Yeah. Like an ordinary state of consciousness, that kind of daily state of consciousness that you have to have in order to drive your car or whatever.
Yeah.
But that there's more. That's what I hear you saying.
And one thing let me say this just because it's relevant. Like I listen to a lot of Ram Dass recordings. I really resonate with Ram Dass's teachings, and one of the things that he has said over and over, or said while he was alive, was that if you can just acknowledge and be aware of two states of consciousness at one time, I'm human and I'm being. I'm matter and I'm spirit. It allows for something different to emerge. To me, just knowing both is so valuable for living a more spiritual life, let's say.
What helps you with that?
Well, for sure, meditation, without a doubt. And I would say second to that is writing. I have a lot. I do a very deliberate daily tuning in and tuning up practice. So it changes depending on what I'm doing and what I'm in the midst of, but it really boils down to like checking in. And I say, like, I need to check my gauges. Like, where am I? What's the weather in here? So just like shining the light on my emotional state can often allow for a little more presence. And then I check in on what am I appreciating? I make lists upon lists upon lists of just what's working, what's good, what's a dream I'm living that I once dreamed. So I'm showing myself, oh, wow, look at how it works. You say this, then you move along the path, and then all of a sudden, here you are living it. And then I get to celebrate that. And then nature, walking, swimming, being out in it is like air, that is my nourishment. It's a way that I can really feel what I like to say, alive in the aliveness. Like I love that sense of like, I am alive in this aliveness of my life. It's so satisfying.
Oh yeah.
So when you're talking about checking in and checking your gauges, are you checking in with yourself? What are you checking in with? Yourself?
Checking in with my brain. So one of the things that I teach parents and humans is recognizing that when we're stressed, we're not as able to access. So if you think of the brain as kind of three parts, you've got your human functioning system, you've got an emotional functioning system kind of in the middle, and you've got your more survival reptilian functioning system. And when we're resourced, we're operating at this human level. We've got access to compassion and creativity and inspiration. But when we're overdone and we're stressed, when the stress goes up, the brain functioning goes down and we're more emotional, let's say, if we're in our mammalian brain state, or we're in fight or flight. And so the minute I check in and kind of get a read on where I am, I have more presence of mind. And so I check in on my brain state, I check in on my emotional state, and it's as simple as asking myself, what's the weather inside? Is it sunny?
Gotcha.
Is it cloudy? Is it rainy? Like, no judgment. The other thing I like to just simplify for people is like, where am I on the continuum between steady, where I feel like, okay, I'm good, I'm grooving, and wobbly, where I feel chaotic or swirly inside. And again, one of my teachers, Dan Siegel, one of his kind of catchphrases is, you got to name it to tame it. That if you just become aware of your emotional state, you now have choice whether you want to stay in that state or move on to something else, or just acknowledge that it's there. Like the validation of an emotional state in itself is incredibly powerful, and it calms the nervous system down. And then my body, I check in, like, how am I feeling? Do I feel tight? Do I feel loose? Do I feel strong? Do I feel achy? Like, those are kind of my main gauges that I want to be aware of, because this mechanism, the more I tune it and the more I'm aware of how it operates, the more access I have to this bigger knowing and the channel of inspiration that can flow through.
Thank you.
Is that part of what you mean by, I think I listened to a couple of your talks about pausing, about the pause?
Yes.
So,
yes, exactly. Yeah. Go ahead, ask more.
Well, I was going to say, so that, depending on your life, there's shorter and longer periods of pause is what I'm getting from you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things that I really feel strongly about is that the way that this human mechanism operates, so we've got these nervous systems and we're taking in stimulation through our senses, and the nervous system is trying to process and keep this system relatively balanced. And when we're taking in and giving out all day, we can kind of get overwhelmed, we can get dysregulated. And so when we pause, whether it's for 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 day or a year, we can bring the nervous system back to a little more of a state of balance. And then we have more ability to take in. And the way that this really is so clear is with a little tiny baby person. So like, say at 6 weeks, all of a sudden you're holding your little one and you smile, and then they smile back and you say, oh, and they go, ooh, and you go, wow, and they go, ah, and then they turn away and pause because they need to integrate what just happened. And then they come back and they take in another round. But if we stay engaged all the time, you're going to tip the system, and you're going to be in state of agitation and upset because the nervous system didn't have time to rebalance. And so just the simple idea of pausing really encapsulates something so valuable to our physical and spiritual being that it's like, if that's the only thing people really take from me and my work, it's enough. Like if you can just, and that's why having spiritual practices and going to church can be the pause in a world that doesn't have any turnoffs at this point in our lives.
Oh yeah.
Like you can be engaged 24 hours a day,
all the time,
every day of the year, if you would like to be. And that, based on what we know about this human mechanism, I think knowing how to slow ourselves down and take the breath and make a little space and reconnect to ourselves is so very valuable right now.
And it's so interesting that that's, an ancient practice that's more relevant than ever, given the amount of stimulation and engagement that happens. I just think
I agree.
That's really neat when we have something like that that's existed for so long, is valuable to us. And maybe there's seasons where we put it aside or we don't recognize it as much. And then there are other seasons where, no, we need this. We desperately need this practice.
Yeah. The other reason I think it's so vital is because, to me, and I would love to hear if this is true for both of you, when I've got a question or a situation that I want to understand more, or I want, or I'm going to give a talk and I need to plan what I'm going to share, the doing has limitations, especially if I'm not ever, like, to me, I can create answers from my brain, but when I pause and I allow there to be a little space, the wisdom pops up. The knowing comes through. And that has a different quality than the thinking and the knowledge. Like, to me, knowledge and knowing are different. And so I'm curious for you, like, when you're planning something for your work or your life, where do you source, how do you get into a state that allows that wisdom to come through?
Mind if I go first?
Go for it.
Okay, so whenever I'm going to speak in front of people, it's definitely, I try to take as much time as I possibly can to do what you just said. And the main way for me to do it, the two main ways are meditation and walking in nature. And the way I see it is that it's helping me to open up to something greater than my own ego. And nothing wrong with the ego. It's a great thing. And it's very helpful when I'm actually going to do the talk. But prior to that, if I don't open up, then I think I'm just kind of giving my opinion. But if I can open up more, it definitely feels like something else is trying to come through, and does. And it's a qualitative difference. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
Same. Me too.
I find for myself, similarly, when working on a project, a lot of times I can really focus down on the information, and that I don't get that inspiration piece or the creativity piece until I step away from it sometimes. So I can really get frustrated and just banging away at the information and thinking, why can't I solve this? Why can't I find it? And then when I'm like, I have to take a break, I'll take the break. And then during that break, either through a piece of music or going for a run or something else, some idea will come that I had never connected with what I was doing, that all of a sudden begins to speak louder to me, to the idea of, okay, there's the connection. And I don't know that I would have found it if I had stayed in the wrestling with the information. But it's giving myself permission to not feel guilty stepping away from the grind, to know that, like Thom said, the product that comes out of the balance is so much greater than just pushing ahead in the same direction.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. The other practice, so for sure for me, it's either meditation, so just, and sometimes that doesn't do it. So walking, especially outside, moving my body in nature. But there's also a writing practice that I do that has a similar way to access. And it's, I'll ask the question, like, with regard to this talk I'm going to give tomorrow, I'm thinking, and that allows me just to kind of dump out the ideas. And that's very much here. So I will just say, like, I'm thinking I want to share these ideas. I'm thinking that I need to take care of these things beforehand, blah, blah, blah. It's very practical. Then I drop into, I'm feeling, and I check in. Oh, wow, I'm a little nervous. Or, ooh, I'm not so sure. I don't feel very steady around this. Then I'll ask myself, how do I choose to feel? Oh, I choose to feel inspired. I choose to feel confident. I choose to feel clear. Okay, now what am I knowing? And the knowing is when I have access to that bigger inspired wisdom. And it's so amazing that by dumping out the thoughts, by honoring the emotion and considering what I want to feel, I have a different quality of knowing that can come through. And the ways that I've been led to understand when it's a knowing is there's no fear and there's no question. Like if there's any fear or question, that's thinking. But if I'm in my knowing is like when my higher self or God or whatever I choose to call it that day kind of wraps the energetic arms around me and just whispers like, you've got this, you know what this is about. Like, and it's so warm and nurturing, and it just calms everything down.
Yeah, it makes me think of what you're talking about with the Tibetans and how they see consciousness. That it's a larger energy, not one that we're just creating. It's one that we enter into. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to get at when he talked about the kingdom of God and stuff like that. He was trying to get out to me. He was trying to get into this bigger energy, this bigger source, this bigger reality. And then when we tap into that, when we live into that, it does what you're talking about. And because that's definitely my experience as well. It's a qualitative difference to life.
Qualitative.
No doubt about it.
Everything is magical, and there's awe, and the synchronicities and the blessings and the goodness is like multiplied. And I believe we arrive with the access to, I think when a little one, I mean, partly I think why I was so drawn to babies when I was little was because being with a newborn and just laying there and holding them while they're sort of regulating this body, but also like I felt like that, like to me that's the deepest meditation, is holding a tiny little human, because I think they are still connected on a deeper level. And so one of the reasons I do what I do and I teach parents these ideas is so that not only can they hold the possibility that there's more to this child than they can see, but also recognize, well, if I believe that about them, then I need to recognize that's who I am. And so, you know, it's like, I want people to have an understanding of human development, both on what goes on in these brains and bodies to bring more compassion to the idea of development, but it's also because I want people to be alive to their spiritual development too, for the very reason we're talking about, which is life feels richer, we have more insight, we trust ourselves more. And that to me, like the more than one way, the fact that that's the name of your podcast, like that's one of my mantras with families is there's no right way. You have to find your way. And in order to find one's way, I do believe you have to get beyond the thinking and the ego and the limitations of knowledge and tap into something that's much more divine and coming from somewhere that isn't just this plane.
And I love the idea of trusting yourself more. I think with the people I work with, that's probably the biggest thing, is to try to say, you know, can you just open up and trust what comes, and then trust yourself with that. You know, I have the reputation of asking a lot of questions. So somebody will ask me a question and I'll say, I don't know, what do you think? Just to see what's kind of going on in their mind, to see what, not to bust my game, but that's part of the deal is I'm thinking, if you're asking me this question, you're thinking about it somehow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what do you think? And for some people it's a breath of fresh air. For some people it's like, just tell me what
Exactly.
it is, and more than anything, it's the just tell me what it is my hope is that they can just trust what comes.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
Yeah, and that requires a certain level of faith. And so that's why if I can make a little chip, like if I can move the needle a tiny bit, great. Like I love this world we live in, and I also love the expansion of what's possible. And it does feel like I love the fact that we are in this place where we have these devices and we all agree that, oh, I spoke about that, or I thought about that, and then it showed up on my phone.
Right.
Yeah.
To me, I feel like this is like a training device for us to actually start believing that we are as powerful and tapped in and tuned in as we actually are.
Yeah.
And so it's fun that people are starting to play some of these games of like, wow, I thought that happened. Okay, what else is possible?
Yeah.
And really helping make the bridge between, like, especially in parenting, like you're not making this person who they are. You're creating an environment and you're resonating a way of being that's going to influence how they understand human life. But the isness of that person is who they are. And so be curious and be in awe and recognize that there are almost unlimited ways of being a human. So how do we celebrate that and honor it and not limit the possibilities of what people can be doing here? Because that's when you're honored at the beginning. I got lucky. The thing I loved was something that people around me thought was a great thing to love. Oh, you love babies? Great. Come hang out with us and help me with my kids. Oh, you want to learn this? Okay, great. Like, how lucky that I got supported in really getting my 10,000 hours of watching and studying humans before I was even in college, because I was just so dedicated to understanding with joy. It wasn't like, oh, I better be studying for my career down the road. It was just, I got to understand this. I got to be around this. It feels so good.
I love what you said too. Just as someone who's not a parent, I can really resonate with what you're saying, with a challenge for myself and interacting with other people as well, with the idea of knowing there's more and being more curious in my interactions with people, rather than being frustrated about why are they behaving differently than me, or why did they not behave the way I expected them to. Taking that same mindset that you mentioned, I think that's a real freeing thought for people.
Oh, yay. Good. I love that. Yeah. And that's the fun of this. I don't have children of my own. So I got into this because of my curiosity and my passion, and I walked my path and did my life, and that wasn't part of it. But in a lot of ways, I mean, absolutely, I value that I got to be this witness, this observer of this game, that once you're in it, once you cross the bridge into parenting, it's hard to have any objectivity about what it is. And so it feels like a divinely crafted life. Like I do agree with where we started with what you said of, there's some people, and I am one of them. Like, I do believe we choose the playing field we arrive in to play, and the games that we're here to play, and the lessons that we're going to learn, so that this consciousness can just keep evolving and expanding and getting more compassionate and more loving. So it's just a fun game to be playing. I love it.
It is a fun game, and what a lovely world if we all played that game.
Yeah.
one thing that, just a lot of what you're saying, my hope is that it frees parents up
Yeah. Oh,
from
goodness.
feeling like the responsibility of I am creating this life. And once again, so many of the people I'm around, in particular mothers, seem to feel that. And so thank you for freeing, hopefully this will help them free them up from that responsibility, because they measure themselves almost like and grade themselves. And I'm just hoping this touches them the way it's touching me, because it's freeing me up as a parent as well. So thank you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's one of my big reasons for being here, is helping people recognize this is just a relationship with another human. And it has become very loaded in our human minds that, parenting, it matters. And it certainly does, but not because you're making them who they are. It's because who you are is going to influence how they understand themselves. So the more one understands themselves, and the more self-aware and clear the person in the role of parent can really be, there's more freedom and honoring of this other person's experience. And then there's real connection and depth in the relationship. Like I have I say it sort of tongue in cheek, but I kind of mean it. Like, in my world, if we could get rid of the word parenting, I think we'd all be better off.
Yeah.
Because it puts this pressure on humans to think, well, this is this person this child I have to get to adulthood in a safe and healthy way, without really honoring the fact that that person's having their own journey.
Yeah.
That you're witnessing and you're walking alongside, and you're going to be adults together for way longer than they're going to be children. And so how do you trust it and trust them and trust that you're giving them enough, and that, you're not going to do it perfectly, but that's not what this is about. It's really about like finding the points of connection and stringing those beads of connection and love, and like sending them off into the world with a sense of, wow, I'm loved and I'm cared for, and these people are doing a good job of considering how they're living, and I'm gonna take what I need and also figure it out myself too.
That's so wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
That's like a beautiful way to kind of close, I think.
Yeah.
Okay,
What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah, because what a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us, and just for your energy and passion around this. I think it's very contagious, and it really is inspiring. So I appreciate you joining us and talking about more than one way to really view our personhood, and just our development. So thank you.
Thank you. What a gift. I am so honored, and I love this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the More Than One Way podcast, brought to you by the Center for Spiritual Practice in Knoxville, Tennessee. We really appreciate your time and would love to hear your feedback. You can reach us by emailing hello@morethanonewaypod.com, or you can connect with us on social media using the handle @morethanonewaypod. If you found this episode helpful, we hope that you'll share it with your friends, with your family, with people you work with all the people who you know. Thank you, and take care.